All right, well, scan out Subuego, Wahadandi Negaso, Gnata Navagation, Gayakono Niaquenzo. So my English name is Taylor. I'm Turtle Clan, Hugo Nation, and I'm from Six Nations. And so our presentation today is going to be on coming to Grand River. So roughly what the years we'll cover is about like 1779 until 1785. So I always like to start my presentations off, like especially with this one, by a quote by Jake Thomas Kant. And then he's basically just saying that there's no experts in a culture, we're all just learning it. And if I have something to share with you, and if you find it useful, you can pick it up as well too. And it's also my disclaimer too, to say like I don't know everything like that, and I'm just a beginner as well too. So today, what we're gonna be covering is the Covenant Chain a little bit, American Revolution, Halderman Proclamation, and then the Grand River lands. So we're just gonna kind of talk a little bit about like how did we come to the Grand River? How did we come to this place here where we're from? And I'll give you like a little bit of a historical timeline as well too. So this kind of covers from the French Indian War or the 7 Years' War to the migration of the Grand River. Oh, I don't know if it covers everything. I kind of cut it off there. So you have 1755 to 1761 is when we're engaged with this war with our allies, the English, against the French. 1761 to 1763, you have Pontiac's Rebellion. And then you have 1768, the Fort Stanwix Treaty. 1775, the American Revolution. And in 1777, most of the Haudenosaunee side with the British, but also a large group of Oneidas and Tuscaroras side with the Americans. 1778 to 1779, I know it's a 70, but 79, they have the Clinton and Sullivan Campaign, which is something that's really like, has kind of like a disastrous effect for our people, where we have to take refuge at Fort Niagara. And then 1783, you have the Treaty of Paris, which ends the war. And then 1784, you have the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. And about 1784 to 85 is their migration to the Grand River. So those are some of the things that we'll talk about and try to cover. And this picture up here, this painting up here is Johnson Hall. So that's where a lot of the treaties would begin and stuff like that too. And so whenever they have treaties or conferences, it wouldn't just be like a couple days, it wouldn't just be like a day or so, it'd be like a few days or even up to a month. Okay, so that's some of the things we're gonna cover today. And I just wanted to show you like some of where our natural homelands were, and what is now like kind of upper and western New York State. This is where we're from. Now you have the Gannett Gehaga or Gannett Kiono, Oneotka, Oneidas, Onodegehono, Gayakono, and the Senecas. And about 1712 to 1722, you have the Tuscaroras coming up from North Carolina. So that's where we were. And somehow we end up over here somehow. Okay? So we're going to try to answer that. Like, again, keep in mind too, a lot of these issues are really complex. And so this will be mostly like an overview, just kind of like touching on some of the subjects, because you can really get into it, and there's a lot of information that's in there, and available as well too. And so like just kind of talking a little bit about the covenant chain, we call it Atantra de Venetsandako, or friendship belt. So about the covenant chain of friendship was made with the English about 1664 to 1665. And it replaced our previous relationship with the Dutch, which they call Dikneo de Hade Gaswanta or Turo Wampum. So you have the Dutch coming in, and then you have the English replacing them. And so that's where you have the covenant chain of friendship. And have you all heard this before? Like, I feel like they talk a lot about it around here. Have you heard about the covenant chain? Do you know the meaning behind it? So they say this is, so again, like the white background wampum, that tells you like it's a peaceful relationship, it's a friendship belt. So right here you have the native person, and then over here you have the non-native person. And so they're linked together through this road, or this chain they call it. And so why the native person has like all that white there is because they're all heart. That's the way I was always told anyway, it's because we're all heart. And when the Europeans had arrived, or when the English had arrived, they had no heart. And so that's what that little piece of there is, that we gave them that heart. And that's how big their heart is, it's quite small. So anyways, when you have like issues or trouble or anything like that, you're supposed to jiggle this chain, and the other side is supposed to respond and help. And so that's something that the English did a lot too. They jiggled that chain during the French Indian War, as well as when they're making peace with other indigenous nations. They'd always be jingling this chain, and we'd have to come and act as mediators to create a peace for them and to also like help create relationships. We're definitely relationship builders. All right, so we're going to jump right ahead from all that stuff that goes on because there's so much information, especially about the American Revolution. That could take up like a whole course. That would take a long time just to talk about it. So I'll just give you like a brief just really brief. So it definitely is divided loyalties. So keep in mind too, we have the English crown, we're allies with the English crown, and also we're friends with American colonists, like George Washington, Benjamin Franklin. All these people were coming into our councils and having this like on-the-ground relationship. So you can see like how our people got divided. And we tried to remain neutral as much as possible, but our allies kept trying to push us into this conflict between how we understand it is the father and son. So the king and his children, which is the American colonists, we understand it was a fight between a father and son, and that we had no business getting into this family dispute. But again though, our people were definitely impacted by our friendship with them. You know, we're drawn into these treaties that we had to assist our allies one way or another. And we could say definitely it was very disastrous for us to get into this conflict because it ended up creating this big whirlwind and it ended up destroying a lot of our lives and it put us into conflict. So a lot of us ended up siding with the British, especially like Joseph Brant and a lot of the Mohawks, Cayugas and Senecas. Like a lot of us jumped in the ship with the English. And so that's kind of where a lot of our trouble begins as well too. And so there's a couple of other fights that were going on. So one of the major battles is the Battle of Oriskany, the Battle of Wyoming, and then Cherry Valley. And so through these raids, you have Joseph Brant, you have some other fellows like Governor Black Snakes, who we'll see a little bit. And then we also have like John Norton, and you have John Butler. And so when the Americans were gaining steam and they had were crushing some of our people, they ended up launching this Clinton-Sullivan campaign in 1779. And they raided through the Oneidas to come through what they call the Forbidden Gateway, or the Forbidden Trail. So they come all the way up here and they led them up through here, and they ended up raiding all these villages. There's about 50 villages they had destroyed. And so like they have a lot of journal accounts of the conflict as well too. They talk about all these orchards and peaches and all the crops they had destroyed in these houses. Like this sounds like it was really like an amazing place to live. And they just destroyed everything. They had killed people and everything like that along the way. And so there's a lot of detailed accounts of these through journals and things like that that you can find, especially Clinton and Sullivan. So I'll show you. So you got Major John Sullivan, and then you got Brigadier General James Clinton. So they're the two that were kind of responsible for a lot of this too, that had laid destruction. And I believe that's how after this conflict here, they had titled the president's name as Hana de Gañas, or Town Destroyer. And so a lot of our people had to take refuge because we were chased out of our homelands and everything like that. And we took refuge at Fort Niagara. And so that's where people got pushed out at a time. And so a lot of people had died from disease and the cold weather and everything like that. And so it had a major impact on our people. And the other thing too is the council fire at Onondaga had to be removed over to Buffalo Creek after that. We got pushed further west. So one of the notable people in our history, and one of the biggest responsibilities for why we're here is, of course, is Joseph Brant, or Tyendinaga. So he's born on the Ohio River, March 1742 to November 24th, 1807. So he passes away November 24th, 1807 in Burlington. He's educated at Lebanon, Connecticut, so it's like an Indian day school where like people were being educated at the time, especially if you were from a notable family, you were sent there to learn like the white man's education. He was a British loyalist. Like his sister ended up marrying that Sir William Johnson. So like he had a lot of like political family connections as well to the crown. His home village was Gnajahari. So after time he becomes like this war captain of the Mohawks. He led followers and those loyal to the crown to Grand River in 84 and 85. And then he also secured the Halderman deed for us in 1784. And I guess we could still say he kind of remains a controversial figure in our community to this day. But that happens later on in the 1800s and stuff like that about the land sales. So I won't get into that too much because that's another thing that we could talk about. Again, like with Joseph Brant too, like he was a devout Christian. His sister was, what I had already said, his sister was already married to Sir William Johnson, the British Indian agent. So if you ever want to read more about Sir William Johnson, he has about 13 volumes of just like his diaries, his correspondence with like soldiers, and well as like his views of like Six Nations people as well too. So you see a lot of cultural customs mentioned in there as well too. It's very interesting. He had religious, political, family, personal ties to the crown. We had said that. Brant went to England and met with King George III. So he went over there a few times. So again, he's meeting all these like, I guess royalty, I guess you would call them. And again, he was later made captain of the British military and commanded a troop of the Haudenosaunee warriors. And one of the ones that you can read a lot about too is it's called William L. Stone and the Life of Joseph Brant. And what I had gathered from what his name means, Tyndonega, means like a cord of wood tied together. But as we'll see a little bit later on, this guy named Governor Blacksnake describes that more as like it was a symbol of unity. And that's what his name meant, was as I guess like unity or unification. And so just to give you some historical context as well too, like we didn't get too much into the American Revolution, just know like a lot of our people had decided to go fight with the English. Again, it was an open decision for people that they could decide who they wanted to fight with. In 1783, Congress demanded the cessions from the Haudenosaunee, and the New York Assembly proposed to expel all Mohawks, Cayugas, Onondagas, and Senecas from the lands. Even the Tuscaroras and Oneidas, who had sided with the Americans, many of whom had assisted the revolutionaries, were to be relocated to vacant Seneca lands in western New York. General Frederick Halderman protested Lord of Treasury Frederick North, Earl of Guilford, that the Haudenosaunee believed that England did not have the right to cede jurisdiction of their lands to the United States, that the Haudenosaunee wanted the Treaty of 1768 boundary line confirmed. So again, like if you've ever seen that boundary line, it gave us like a huge chunk of land. They actually wanted to create like an indigenous state for us. But again, that was if the English had won, but they didn't. And again too, like, so this will be something that comes out later on too, is like of our lands, especially of England, because the treaties we made of England was only to them to create their forts, never to actually own the land. So in this Treaty of Paris that happens in 1783, they ceded all the lands over to the Americans. And they didn't, like our belief is they didn't have a right to do that. You can't give them something that you don't own. So the Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3rd, 1783 between Great Britain and the United States, effectively ending the war between Great Britain and the United States. Great Britain to cede for the lands owned by the Haudenosaunee, no provisions for Haudenosaunee. So even though we got into this conflict and things like that, our people were never mentioned in this Treaty of Paris. They left us out of it. In fact, it was not even in this continent. It was over in Europe, in Paris. So you can see like all the forts that were ceded throughout the time. So like New York, a lot of the Pennsylvania lands, Connecticut and Virginia. So our people had owned all the way down coming up here. And that was through through the good mind and things like that, that we had great peace and relationship building, that we were able to have a say in all these lands up here. But after the American Revolution, we had gotten defeated. Our people had lost so much. So there's a lot of like documentation too as well too that can support a lot of the events that happened after the American Revolution. So this one, Brant the Halderman at Quebec. So this is an actual speech. So he calls him Brother Ashogoa and representative of the king, the sachems and war chieftains of the 6 United Nations of Indians and their allies have heard that the king, their father, has made peace with the children of the Bostonians, the Indians distinguished by Bostonians, the Americans in rebellion, as it first began in Boston. So that's probably the Boston Tea Party's referencing. When they heard of it, they found that they were forgot and no mention made of them and said peace. So it's a longer speech. I just didn't include everything on there. But again, too, like, so as we see later on at this Treaty of Fort Stanwix, which I'll talk about a little bit after, it was a total surprise for our people to find out that they had made peace with them. And they had no say for us in there. I guess we could say you could definitely feel like it was like a backstab or it was a betrayal. So again, if you want to find this document, that's where it is there. It's over in the British History Museum. I know I can't really see the photo too well, but I'll leave the PowerPoint here. So it says Sir Frederick Halderman there. So August 11th to 1718, June 5th to 1791. Lieutenant General, Governor of Quebec. He also got us the Halderman deed. He fought in the American Revolution. He also fought in the French-Indian War. And again, he fought for a lot of our people as well too, but he also, again, like a lot of these people, they seem like they're really interesting, but at the same time though, they're super prejudiced against our people and the way that they talk about indigenous people as well. But yeah, the Halderman papers are in the British History Museum, so that's something that people can definitely dig into as well too to find more information about him. And so after the American Revolution happened, the United States tried to create several peace treaties for the Haudenosaunee. It doesn't happen until 1794, which is kind of beyond a little bit of our scope here. But 1794, you have the Treaty of Canandaigua, and that's where they kind of create that peace between the Haudenosaunee and the Americans. But this failed treaty of, they call it Fort Stanwix Treaty. So as to make peace with the U.S. and Haudenosaunee, representatives agreed to the Fort Stanwix Treaty of 1784. This was designed to reestablish peace and provide some protection for the Haudenosaunee lands against white speculators. Again, white speculators was the number one thing that were coming in, and surveyors that would come in and they'd carve up our lands on us, and then they would start selling it on us. So again, keeping these people out of our lands, away from our lands, is definitely a way to protect our lands. However, it was never ratified by the Grand Council, and people were unhappy with the loss of land demanded by the Americans. Again, they were asking way too much. And so we got a little bit of inside, I guess like an inside observation. And so one of the views that we have is this guy named Chainbreaker. They call him Taifania. He's also the nephew of Hansel Lake. So if you ever studied the Code of Hansel Lake, and you find that nephew who touched his chest there to fill a warm spot, this was him here. And so he was there. He also gives an account called the Chainbreaker's War, so it's like his memoirs. So he read the story all in Seneca to this other Seneca fellow who translated it for this other white guy. And he wrote this his whole life story down. So he talks about meeting Jefferson, has like his uncle Corn Planter and like his uncle Hansel Lake. He talks a little about Red Jacket and Brant. So he was there at that treaty. So he got to have like an eyewitness account. But keep in mind too, he was about 80 years old when he started giving this whole story down. So his memory might not be so good, but it might be good on some parts. So he said the American representative handed over this letter to Brant. Brant took it in his hand and read a few lines and began to swear and stamp down. He turned his face right around and toward us and said, "We have been deceived by the King of Great Britain. Therefore, we will not stay here another minute. We will go back and we won't give up our lands as the British did." Brant's resolution, that was to continue fighting for his right. He was willing to die for his right in his country to struggle with America. So again, like we just seen that quote before where he was asking Halderman, had they made peace with Boston, or the Bostonians or the Americans? So it doesn't seem like he really got an answer until this Treaty of Fort Stanwix. So it must have been quite a shock for him to find out that the British had ceded all their lands on him. You know, it must have been like a really gut-wrenching feeling. So that's the last page of the Treaty of Paris right there in 1783. There's no mention of like Six Nations people at all. So it continued, Halderman tried to keep secret the Treaty of Paris with its dubious terms of which from the Haudenosaunee, as he feared that they might see it as a betrayal of their previous treaties. He feared that if they found out that England ceded much of their territory to Americans without their consent. So again, it's like a huge issue that's going on too, that we find out the British actually end up selling the lands on us. So we get more from Chainbreaker, who was there too. And it's a really interesting chapter. If you don't get a chance to read it, there's a good snippet of it. So Brant then cooled off his ambitions and he said, "I will now grant this all along with you. I will depart and go to the great King of Britain and make him good for all deceiving he has done to us. And you, Corn Planter and Red Jacket and others, go and see Washington and transact with Washington. Don't let him cheat you or deceive you in making a treaty. And I will do what I can with the king." So Brant left us on this ground on the same day. So again, like they had like this huge discussion. They actually had like a council for like 3 or 4 days. They were trying to talk about what are they going to do. Do we take the deal with the Americans, or do we go see if we can get a better deal with England, with the crown? And so that's what Joseph Brant did right away. He went to go see the crown. Because I don't think they were going to let Brant, I don't think the Americans were going to let Brant live in peace. I think they were going to try to kill him one way or another because of how much grief he's caused them over there. So this is the statue of Joseph Brant out in Brantford there. This is in that park there. So Brant returns from England. So this is from Chainbreaker. He gives us this view that, it's just remarkable. Brant said, "I have reserved the land in Canada sufficient to keep all 13 nations. Its situation commences at the mouth of the Grand River. It is 12 miles wide as long as the head of the river. It would be sufficient for all the different Indian nations." Joseph Brant then rather wanted the Six Nations to go over to Canada to make a permanent home together with all the Indian nations, to establish their own customs and traditions, the different tribes of Indians and their own regulations, and to live once more as an independent government. The Six Nations rather refused to do so. So again, I think it's also a lot of times people didn't want to leave their homelands. They're too tied to it. And I often, when I tell my class that, I often ask them, would you leave Six Nations here with all your family that are buried here? It'd be very tough to do that. All your memories growing up here, all your ancestors that are buried in their cemeteries and things like that, it'd be difficult to leave. And so there's also this Haudenosaunee woman's view too that was going on at this, because keep in mind, it wasn't just the men making these decisions, but there's also a lot of the women are making decisions as well too. They have a part of it, but it's just not written as much. That's the only thing. It's really hard to find stuff written about it. So in the fall of 1784, at the meeting of Buffalo Creek, the clan mothers decided that Haudenosaunee should split into two, half going to Grand River and the other half remaining in New York. The Confederacy wampum belts were also divided, half coming to Grand River, where a new council was kindled. So keep in mind too that you also get the explanation of why there was duplicate chief titles as well too, which is like another issue that we don't have time to get into, but just know that's how a lot of that duplication had happened as well too. But the thing I thought that was interesting, and I thought to include it too, was Chainbreaker was there to hear what they had said, what the women had said, and so he talked about it as well too. So when the next day the question was raised about removal to Canada, they called on the wisest of the middle-aged women to see what they said on the subject of removal to Canada, to make a permanent home there forever. It was left to them whether we would go or not. The women decided that the Six Nations would remain on the south side of the line between America and Great Britain, for in the future the Canadians might be obliged to remove or might be driven off their lands. Then the Canadians might have to share with us, and if we should be driven off or deprived of our lands, we would have to share with them. In justice, we would have to accept whatever was given to us. It was an impossible situation. So you can see why they had to divide up like that, is for survival. In case we get over there and the Crown decides to destroy us or try to exterminate us, we have a home in the US. Likewise, if the US tries to exterminate our allies, our brothers and sisters on that side, they can come over here to have protection here. So we're going to survive either way. So I think it was like survival. It was about survival. And just to add a little bit more information too. So on May 22nd, 1784, Six Nations has a meeting with the Mississaugas. And so they're talking about this lands here. So this is the 1701 Nan-Fran Treaty, and so this is the beaver hunting grounds right around here. So we do have some ties to this land as well too. But at the time, the New Creditors were living here, and our Mississaugas, the First Nation, were living there. So I found this document too, like that's the source where you want to go if you want to dig in to look for this. So they talk about it too, that they're not the owners of this land. Actually, they're here, but also they're the sole owners of this land. There's other people here living here as well too. And so this is like how much land they had granted them between the lakes here, all the way around here. So we, the Mississaugas, are not the owners of all the land laying between the three lakes, but we have agreed that we are willing to transfer our right of soil and property to the King, our Father, for our brethren, the Six Nations. Captain Brant, we are happy to hear you intend to settle on the Grand River, the River Oswego, with your people. We hope you will keep your young men in good order, and we shall be in one neighborhood, and to live in friendship with each other as brethren ought to do. So I was like, that's important as well too, to realize that, New Credit is definitely our brothers and sisters as well too. We have a long relationship with them. And so one of the documents that we have is the Halderman Proclamation on October 25th, 1784. So His Majesty's faithful allies purchased a tract of land from the Indians situated between the lakes of Ontario, Erie, and Huron, and I do hereby in His Majesty's name authorize a permit the said Mohawk Nation and such other Six Nations Indians. So if you want to find where that original one is well too, well, their version of it, you can find it here as well too. That's in the British History Museum. So that's what we have out in our park there. Oh, and the Veterans Park, so you'll find one of the Ottoman Grant there. So it talks about because of our contributions to the American Revolution, for the Crown, we needed lands because we had lost everything over there. Oh, not the backtrack, but they do talk about how it divided up too. When people were decided to go to Canada or they're going to stay in the US, they said the Onondagas were divided, the Cayugas were divided, the Tuscaroras were divided, the Senecas were, or I say Senecas, but the Mohawks weren't divided. They were all going over there. And so people had to decide whether they're going to stay or go. And so it definitely split up families. But again, I think just keep in mind that survival, that was the intention of it, is to survive. Whether you're going to survive over here or survive over here. Sorry, I just had to mention that too. I just got reminded of that. So that's what they were paid for that. So it's the sachems, war chiefs, and principal women for it, and in the consideration of 1,180 pounds, 7 shillings, and 4 pence, lawful money of Great Britain to them. So that's how much they were sold for this land. Again, that's another issue that's going to be it's definitely controversial later on as well too. So I won't get into that too much. We just don't have the time. So this was a census of 6 nations on the Grand River in 1785. So keep in mind too, it's not 1,843 people isn't too much. So you have Mohawks, you have Onondagas, you have the Barefoot Party, which is a group of Onondagas from the west, Upper Hugas, Upper Tulos, Okwagas, which is like a mixed communities. You have Delawares, another group of Okwagas, Tuscaroras, Lower Hugas, St. Regis, the Montours, Creeks and Cherokees, Lower Tuolese, Delawares, Senecas from the west, and then you have the Nanticokes as well too. And again, if you want to know where that document is as well too, that's still the same place, British History Museum. So this is the Mohawks divided themselves into communities of Akwesasne, Ganawage, Tainanega, Wata, Ganasatake, Grand River. A Confederacy Council was established at the Grand River, but another one still existed in New York. Brant and John Deserano relinquished all Mohawk land rights in New York in 1797. The Haudenosaunee adopted the British farming model. Keep in mind too, John Deserano and Joseph Brant didn't always get along too, and so that's why they have the other community out near Tainanega. So this was a painting of the Mohawk village, or a watercolor of the Mohawk village in 1806. So if you can tell right there, that is the Mohawk Chapel. So some of the houses that were there, and this is actually a depiction of some of the council there as well too. Again, I don't know how accurate it is because they believe like the river is just like right around here. So I don't know if it moved or not, or if it's just like just their understanding of it. I'm not too sure. And so this is another depiction of the Halderman Grant as well too, in 1821. Again, there's a map that's missing of this as well too. That's what I thought was interesting. There's a map that, along the Grand River. They had mapped it out again. They had another surveyor come through in like late 1700s, and now it's disappeared. They can't find it anywhere. But that's where it talks about some of the lands living here as well too. You have those Hugas, Mohawks, Senecas living here. And you got a couple of Delawares and people living along the Grant here. So this is 1821. But the other map I'm really excited about is this one here. So the first Anglican missionary, his name was Reverend Robert Lugger. So he was the first one in our area. Our people were calling him to come down. And so he did this map in 1828 that shows where all the Six Nations were living along the Grand River. So you have up here, you have the Mohawks, Onondagas, Hugas, the Okwagas are living there. You have a Tuscarora village here. And then you have another group of Onondagas, Senecas, Onondagas called the Barefoots, the Nile settlement, Lower Hugas, Delawares, all the way down to like the Erie. So I always thought that's really interesting too. It's like you have all the crops on one side, all the farms, and all the houses are living on there. And he wrote this report in 1829 where he talks about visiting all these communities as well too, from the Mohawks all the way down to the Hugas. And it's the Mohawks who call him father. That's what I thought was interesting. But when it gets down to the Hugas and Delawares, they call him brother still. So like the kinship term is still like in effect there, which I thought was interesting. But I think this is important as well too. So on the fourth day of council, when Brant asked the Six Nations, so keep in mind this is Black Snake, we're going back all the way back into when they were deciding whether to go or not. The fourth day of council, when Brant asked Six Nations whether they wanted to have the right to take their choice of the two countries, that is what some for Canada and some for staying in the States. Brant wished to have a part of all the Six Nations go to Canada, though some would remain here. So I guess I forgot I had added that quote later on. All right, so it's kind of like our conclusion, I guess, or how are we going to wrap things up? Like, how did we get here, or why did we get here? Our divided loyalties between the American Revolution, so Britain and the colonists were divided on that issue. The American Revolution definitely played a big part in that as well too, because a lot of us our ancestors had decided with the English, and the English ended up losing the war. A lot of our lands had gotten taken over as well too. Clinton-Sullivan Campaign, which pushed us out of our homelands all the way out to where we had to take refuge at Fort Niagara. The Treaty of Paris as well too, and its failure to recognize our lands, as well as to remove any right or remove the British right from it, but also to give Americans control over our lands, whereas they had no right. Because if you look back into the earlier treaties, they only made the agreement that you could build a fort there, you don't own the land. So when this Treaty of Paris happens, the Great Britain cedes all the land to the US, but they didn't have that, it wasn't theirs to give, is kind of like the argument behind that. They had no right to give those lands up. So yeah, definitely have the Halderman Proclamation as well too. So Joseph Brant and Sir Frederick Halderman, they secured this land grant for us to move over here. And then you have the Grand River and the Mississaugas who we said earlier, they said they weren't the sole owners of this land, but they were just occupying the space, and that they agreed that they set us apart for us. And again, too, it was just an impossible situation. So our people were just pressed a lot through the American Revolution, as well as the Sullivan Campaign, which was like a revenge on us. So we had a lot of issues going on, and it was just like why we come to here was also a chance for us to survive and start anew again, to rebuild our Confederacy and to rebuild our lives again. But yeah, so like I guess that's pretty much it. I don't want to keep talking or anything like that. If you have any questions or anything, like you can definitely let me know. If you want a copy of this PowerPoint. That's it. That's all.